somewhere inside an old hangar, museum, or forgotten archive, there are airplanes that were supposed to change aviation forever. They were faster than conventional aircraft and more advanced than almost anything flying around them. Engineers spent years designing them, while companies and governments invested millions to make them work. And then something happened. The project stopped. Some aircraft were cancelled, some were restricted, and some disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared. In one famous case, the remaining evidence was even deliberately destroyed. So why would anyone build an aircraft for years, only to make sure it never became part of the future? Sometimes the answer was money, sometimes politics, and sometimes technology created problems nobody expected. And sometimes an aircraft was simply too far ahead of the world around it. Today, we're looking at 5 aircraft projects that came dangerously close to changing aviation history. These aren't simply airplanes that failed. They represented completely different futures. And the strangest part is that several of them actually worked. The problem came afterward, because making an airplane fly is only the beginning. In the 1950s, Canada was facing a serious military problem. The Soviet Union had long-range bombers capable of approaching North America through the Arctic. Canada needed an interceptor that could detect them, climb rapidly, fly extremely high, and stop them. The answer was an aircraft that looked almost unbelievable for its time. The Avro Canada CF-105 Arrow. Engineers weren't trying to build an ordinary fighter. They were trying to build one of the most advanced interceptor aircraft on Earth. The Arrow had a large delta wing design and was intended to fly at more than twice the speed of sound. It was also designed for extreme altitude and advanced radar and weapon systems. For its engineers, the Arrow represented Canada's attempt to become a major aerospace power. For a while, that future looked possible. Several prototypes were produced, test flights began, and the aircraft demonstrated impressive performance. The program was moving forward. Then, almost overnight, everything changed. In 1959, the Canadian government cancelled the Arrow program. The aircraft was extremely expensive, Canada's defense strategy was changing, and surface-to-air missiles were changing military planning. But cancelling the project wasn't the strangest part. What happened afterward was. The Canadian government ordered the destruction of the aircraft and much of the project's physical evidence. Aircraft were removed, components disappeared, and tooling was destroyed. Years of engineering work were almost completely erased. The Arrow never became the operational interceptor its designers imagined. It never entered regular service or became the backbone of Canadian air defense. Instead, it became one of aviation history's greatest unanswered questions. What would have happened if the program had continued? Could the Arrow have become one of the world's most advanced fighters? Could Canada have developed into a much larger aerospace power? Nobody knows, and that's what makes the Arrow so fascinating. It wasn't simply an aircraft that failed. It was an aircraft whose future was cancelled before anyone could discover how far it could go. But if the Arrow was a story about a cancelled future, the next aircraft was part of something even bigger: the Cold War. During the 1960s and 1970s, the Soviet Union and the West competed in missiles, spacecraft, nuclear weapons, satellites, and airplanes. The Soviet Union wanted to prove it could accomplish something that sounded almost impossible. It wanted to carry ordinary passengers faster than the speed of sound. The result was the Tupolev Tu-144. When people first saw it, the aircraft looked like it belonged in another era. Its long pointed nose, swept wings, and powerful engines were all built around speed. Everything about the design suggested the future. The idea was revolutionary. Passengers could cross continents in a fraction of the usual time. The aircraft was designed for speeds above Mach 2, meaning more than twice the speed of sound. But the faster an aircraft travels, the more complicated everything becomes. Engines become more demanding, structures face greater stress, heat becomes a problem, and fuel consumption rises. Then there is the sonic boom. When an aircraft crosses the speed of sound, it creates a powerful shockwave that can be heard on the ground. That creates an obvious problem for passenger aviation. You can build an aircraft capable of flying supersonically, but where are you going to let it fly? Over remote areas, the problem is smaller. Over densely populated cities, it is completely different. The Tu-144 also faced another serious setback. During a demonstration flight at the 1973 Paris Air Show, a Tu-144 crashed. Everyone aboard was killed, and people on the ground also died. The disaster became a major setback for the program. Passenger service eventually began, but it remained extremely limited. Technical problems continued, operating costs were high, and the market for supersonic passenger travel was very small. Eventually, the Tu-144 disappeared from passenger service, but it had demonstrated that supersonic passenger travel was possible. The real problem was turning that possibility into something safe, affordable, reliable, and practical. And the Soviet Union wasn't alone. The West was trying to solve the same problem with an aircraft that became the ultimate symbol of speed: Concorde. Concorde had a long, elegant shape, a distinctive drooping nose, powerful engines, and the ability to fly faster than twice the speed of sound. A flight between London and New York could take roughly 3.5 hours. For wealthy travelers, Concorde wasn't simply transportation. It was an experience. It was proof that humans could make distance almost irrelevant. But there was a problem. The future was expensive. Concorde consumed enormous quantities of fuel, required specialized maintenance, and was expensive to operate. Tickets were far beyond what ordinary travelers could afford, so the market was always limited. Then there was the sonic boom. Because Concorde flew faster than sound, it couldn't simply operate supersonically over populated areas. That dramatically restricted its routes. For years, however, Concorde continued flying. And that is what made its story so unusual. It wasn't a prototype or a failed experiment. It was a real commercial aircraft that people actually used. It proved that supersonic passenger travel could work. But then came one of the darkest moments in its history. In 2000, Air France Flight 4590 crashed shortly after takeoff from Paris, killing everyone aboard. The accident temporarily grounded Concorde and damaged public confidence. Concorde eventually returned, but the aviation industry had changed. Fuel costs were increasing, maintenance was becoming more expensive, and premium demand remained limited. Airlines also had increasingly efficient conventional aircraft available. Eventually, the economics became impossible to ignore. In 2003, Concorde made its final commercial flights. One of the fastest passenger aircraft ever built disappeared from commercial aviation. But Concorde left behind an important lesson. Speed wasn't the impossible part. Engineers had already solved that. The real challenge was everything surrounding speed: cost, noise, fuel, regulation, maintenance, and demand. Concorde didn't disappear because humans couldn't build a supersonic passenger aircraft. It disappeared because the world couldn't find a sustainable reason to keep operating one. And America had already been trying to build something even more ambitious: the Boeing 2707. The proposed aircraft was enormous and designed to carry hundreds of passengers at supersonic speed. Boeing wasn't simply copying Concorde. It wanted a different solution. One of its most unusual features was a variable sweep wing. At lower speeds, the wings could extend outward, while at high speeds, they would sweep backward. The idea was to improve aerodynamic performance during different phases of flight. At least, that was the theory. In practice, the design became increasingly complicated. Every engineering solution created another problem. The aircraft became heavier, and development costs kept rising. Environmental concerns then became a major issue. The sonic boom wasn't just an engineering problem, it was a political problem. Governments had to decide whether the benefits of supersonic travel were worth the disruption to people beneath flight paths. Airlines also had to make the numbers work. Would passengers pay enough? Could airlines fill these enormous aircraft, and could they operate them profitably? The answers became less convincing. Eventually, government funding was reduced, and in 1971, Boeing cancelled the project. The aircraft that was supposed to become America's answer to Concorde never entered commercial service. There was no massive fleet, no worldwide network, and no generation of passengers growing up thinking supersonic travel was normal. The 2707 became another aircraft that represented a future that never arrived. But the final aircraft on this list is completely different. It wasn't designed to carry passengers faster or cross oceans in record time. It was designed to shoot down missiles. Imagine seeing a Boeing 747 flying through the sky. At first it looks ordinary. 4 engines, a huge fuselage, and one of the world's most recognizable aircraft shapes. But inside this aircraft was something extraordinary. A giant military laser. That was the Boeing YAL-1. The aircraft was developed as an airborne missile defense system. Its mission sounded like science fiction. Detect a ballistic missile, track it, and use a high-energy laser to destroy it before it reaches its target. But the YAL-1 wasn't just an idea. A Boeing 747 was heavily modified with specialized systems designed to generate and direct a powerful laser beam. Eventually, the aircraft conducted successful test firings. That was the fascinating part. The technology could actually work under controlled conditions. But proving that something works is very different from proving that it is practical. The YAL-1 had major problems. The system was enormous. The aircraft required specialized chemical fuel, the equipment was extremely complex, and operating costs were high. Most importantly, the aircraft needed to be positioned within useful range of potential missile launch areas. That created major strategic and operational challenges. A giant aircraft carrying an expensive laser isn't useful simply because the laser works. It has to survive, reach the right location, detect the target in time, maintain the engagement, and do all of this at a reasonable cost. Eventually, the program was cancelled. The YAL-1 was retired, and its unique laser system was dismantled. The aircraft that represented an almost science fiction future of missile defense disappeared. But its technology didn't simply vanish. Research from the project continued influencing later work involving high-energy lasers and directed energy systems. And that makes the YAL-1 different from many of the aircraft we've discussed. It wasn't simply a machine that didn't work. It demonstrated fascinating technology, while proving that practicality was another challenge. Now put all 5 aircraft together. The Avro Arrow, Tu-144, Concorde, Boeing 2707, and YAL-1. They were built for completely different purposes. One was designed to intercept enemy bombers, one to carry passengers faster than sound. One became the world's most famous supersonic passenger aircraft. One was America's canceled supersonic airliner, and one transformed a Boeing 747 into a flying laser laboratory. But all 5 share something. They represent futures that never completely arrived. The Arrow was cancelled before reaching its full potential, while the Tu-144 proved supersonic passenger travel was possible, but struggled to make it practical. Concorde demonstrated that speed could defeat distance, but economics eventually defeated Concorde. The Boeing 2707 showed how ambitious America's supersonic dream had become, but disappeared before commercial production. And the YAL-1 demonstrated that an airborne laser could work, while proving that practicality was another challenge entirely. That's the strange thing about aviation history. We usually remember the aircraft that survived, entered service, carried millions of passengers, and became symbols of their generation. But aviation history is also filled with machines that disappeared. Aircraft were too expensive, too complicated, too early. Victims of politics, blocked by regulations, or simply designed for a future that never came. Sometimes the greatest mystery isn't why an airplane failed. It's what the world might have looked like if it hadn't. What if the Arrow had entered full production? What if supersonic passenger travel had become affordable? What if Boeing had successfully built its giant supersonic airliner? What if an aircraft like the YAL-1 had become a practical part of missile defense? We can only speculate. Because once these programs disappear, the future they represented disappears with them. And that's what makes these airplanes so fascinating. They aren't just machines, they're snapshots of possible futures. Futures that engineers believed were achievable, and governments were willing to spend millions pursuing. Futures that sometimes came incredibly close to becoming reality. But then something changed. A budget disappeared. A technology became obsolete. A regulation was introduced. A market collapsed. Or the world simply decided it wasn't ready. And sometimes, the most fascinating airplanes in history aren't the ones that changed aviation. They're the ones that almost did.